Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Kristen Bessler. I'm one of the therapists here at the University Counseling Services at the University of Oregon, and I'm excited for all of you to join us for this presentation of self-care during COVID-19. So this is the first installment of a series of self-care workshops that we're planning to do here. They'll be running every Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. and you can find the Zoom links on our websites under Wellness Workshop. So today is the first workshop in the series where we'll be just going through an overview of what self-care is, demystifying self-care a little bit, and talking about some self-care strategies. As just a general disclaimer, this workshop is not considered to be therapy, counseling, or treatment, although it's likely that it might be beneficial to the well-being of those who participate in it. So it's a good day to take care of yourself. So for everyone who is watching this webinar online, it's a good day to take care of yourself. And I'm glad that you tuned in to maybe learn some ways to do that today. So again, the plan for today is first we're going to talk about what self-care is, actually defining it, and going over some myths around self-care. We're going to talk specifically about self-care during COVID-19. It's a very stressful time, and there's a lot that's changing in our world. So we're going to talk about how self-care works within a COVID world, coping with stress, different domains of self-care, and then we'll wrap up with some specific self-care strategies and talk about some options for resources moving forward. So to start off with a few myths of self-care, I like to start here because self-care has sort of become a buzzword in our world, and there's lots of myths surrounding self-care. The first one I like to talk about is that self-care is a luxury. It's bubble baths, it's spa days, it's vacations. And the truth is that self-care is really about supporting your health and wellness by addressing what it is that will truly improve your wellness. So sometimes maybe that is a spa day or a vacation, but oftentimes it's a lot more little things that you're doing in your world to truly take care of yourself. A second myth of self-care is that self-care is selfish. I hear this a lot from students and people in my life. And the reality is that self-care is about replenishing your own resources and you're not taking from others. And I'm sure people have heard the saying that you need to take care of yourself first before you take care of others. And that is part of what self-care can be about for some folks. Another myth of self-care is that it takes too much time. So again, with the idea that self-care is about vacations and spa days and, taking up days or weeks of your time, that's not actually true, right? So self-care can be as little as 10 minutes a day to do some sort of self-care practice to keep the gas in your tank so that you're not running on empty all of the time. Self-care can also be a shift in your lens in the way that you're viewing yourself and your actions in the world. So oftentimes it is specific activities that you're doing, and sometimes it's just shifting the lens with which you're doing those activities. This last myth on this page that I'd like to dispel is that you need to earn your self-care time. So there's a difference between engaging in self-care and rewarding yourself for something that you've done. So self-care is something that's essential to incorporate into your routine. It's something that's fundamental. It's the foundation of health and wellness. And it's not something that you only get to do when you've, quote, done enough. This mentality is often a great recipe for burnout, which is something that we're hoping to avoid by engaging in self-care. And the last myth of self-care that I want to talk about is that self-care is an emergency response. Right? So this idea that when everything's on fire, that's the time that you'll finally take care of yourself. And the reality is that ongoing, consistent self-care is the best way to engage in self-care. It's about honoring your wellness all of the time and not only when you're sick. So I like this little meme here because this is what can happen when we don't practice ongoing self-care, right? It's about being aware of what you need all of the time and not only focusing on that when your life feels like it's feeling out of control or there's too much going on or you're burned out. Consistent self-care will be less likely to have a Thomas moment pictured here. So we've talked about some myths about what self-care is, what self-care isn't, and I want to talk about it as defined in a more concrete way, right? So self-care is any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. So, the goal of self care is to live a balanced life that takes wellness as a priority. I do want to offer a quick note on self care versus self indulgence, avoidance, or self sabotage. Often these can all kind of get conflated. So it's really important that when you're considering what you need for self care, that you're coming at it from a way that is really promoting your wellness, right? So, an example that I like to give is, right, it's 8 a.m. in the morning and you haven't slept well the night before and you have that class coming up. You could sleep through it, take that time for yourself, or you could go to class, right? Or you could go to class late, whatever. There's a lot of different options that you could take, right? And really figuring out, okay, if I choose to miss this class and sleep instead, am I doing it because maybe I'm avoiding the class because it's a challenge, or I'm self indulging and I'm just getting too much sleep and I'm really just not feeling it today? Or am I really doing it because my body is telling me that I absolutely need to have this sleep? And that is what's going to be the most helpful thing for me, right? So, our brains can sometimes trick us into thinking that the things that we're doing are self care when they may be self indulgence or avoidance or self sabotage. So, some questions to help you determine if what you're doing is self care is really asking yourself, what do I need right now? What is going to be most helpful for me right now? In what way will this activity serve my health and wellness? Is this self indulgence? Is it self care? Is it both? Is it none? Does this align with my values and goals? So, really checking in with yourself and tuning in with yourself to figure out what it is that you need, and is that thing really self care, right? Again, we can often think of self care as those more self indulgent activities, and those can be great too, right? But we need to really consider, sometimes sitting down and studying for an exam rather than spending time with your friends, that might be the self care that you need. Or maybe it's vice versa, right? And it's really unique to everyone. And that's something that I don't know that I can stress enough, that everyone has unique concerns and stressors, identities, circumstances, environments that they're all in, right? And so self care will look different for everyone. And it may look different for you from one day or one week or one month to the next, right? So if your self care is looking different from your peers, it's looking different from what you see on social media, it does not mean that you are doing it wrong if what you are doing is in service of your mental, emotional, and physical health. Self care during COVID-19, why now, right? Um, it's a great question to ask, and something that I think if we're not even overtly asking it of ourselves, we can think of a lot of ways in which self-care during COVID and during a pandemic and during quarantine are all it becomes more essential, right? Because there's many things that are changing that feel outside of our control. Um, and we've had a little time to prepare for these huge changes and these multiple changes that are happening because what is going on in the world and with the pandemic is in some ways very unpredictable. I'm remembering back to when, the middle of March, when a lot of change happened really rapidly. And there wasn't a good model in place of how do we respond to this, because it wasn't something that most people had to manage before. Um, and with that, those rapid changes, our routines and our practices as we knew them have changed. So if we think back to our life a year ago to our life now, a lot's changed in the way that we interact and we socialize and we do our work and we spend time with ourselves and with others in the activities that we engage in. Um, and in that, there's often a sense of loss and grief that's occurring, loss for that life that we were living before, loss of those things that maybe we didn't even really think about because they were just guarantees in our life. And some of those guarantees have now shifted. And there's a lot of increased uncertainty during these times. The stress, anxiety, fear, worry, those are all common responses to a lot of this uncertainty and a lot of these question marks that we're being faced with all of the time. And another note is that self-care looks different for a lot of people now. Again, with all of these changes and little times to prepare and routines and practices that we can't engage in, A lot of people have lost a lot of the self-care practices that might have been their go-tos, whether that was going to the gym or out to dinner with friends. Um, right, all of those little things have kind of changed. So those go-to things that we had on our self-care list, they might not be available and they might not be safe to do right now. So, with all of these changes that are happening with COVID-19, there comes a lot of stressors with that. Some common stressors that people are experiencing these days are a lot of stress and anxiety beyond what would be normal, right? We all experience stress and anxiety to a degree. But for a lot of folks, this feels different, like a different level of stress and a more intense level of stress. Um, there's often can be concerns about how do you balance everything with what's going on. You're not just balancing one new change with remote learning at school, but you're also balancing work and relationships and personal life and self-care, hopefully. And how do you do it all in this different world that we're living in? Like I mentioned before, anxiety, anger, worry, boredom, sadness, uncertainty, apathy, frustration are all common feelings that folks are experiencing. And those feelings can often cause stress in individuals. And vice versa, stress can also be related to some of those feelings. Another common feeling is loneliness and a loss of connection. Again, I'm sure I don't really need to go into details about this because I think a lot of people are experiencing it, that we are in quarantine and a lot of us are isolated. Um, in many different ways. And so there can be a profound loss that happens. Um, Another stressor can be folks' living situations. So a lot of us are around the same people in the same place. We're working, we're relaxing, we're doing school, we're cleaning, we're socializing, we're doing it all in the same environment. Um, and sometimes some of that tension can be related to a lack of privacy or a little alone time or just simply being around the same people all of the time, even if they're people that you typically enjoy spending time with. Another tension could be if you're not living with other people and you're living alone, and that can really add to some more of that loneliness and loss of connection. Another common stressor is concerned about those in your lives who may be at higher risk for complications should they ever get COVID 19. It might be concern if you are in a higher risk category, and a lot of fear and anxiety about that. Lack of routine or schedule can be another stressor that folks experience. We, as humans, are tend to be creatures of habit. We like routines and we like schedules, and all of that has shifted. And a lot of folks are trying to find that quote new normal, those new routines or that new schedule. And it can be challenging when your environment has shifted and you're staying in the same place for a lot of time. Financial stressors are also another common source of stress for individuals, whether that's knowing folks who've lost their jobs or their hours have been cut back, or they themselves are unable to find work during this time, or they themselves have lost their job. There can be a lot of stress around that, or simply just a fear of what if something happens to my job? So we talked about stressors. Let's talk about what stress is, right? So stress is our physiological and psychological response to internal and external events. And we feel stress when the demands of our environment exceed our capacity. So like I mentioned before, we all experience stress to some degree. And some stress is good. Some stress can be helpful. It can be motivating. It can lead us to feel more focused and have some of that adrenaline that helps really get us going and engaged in the stuff that matters to us. But as you can see from this chart, too much stress is never a good thing. It can lead to, right, feeling burnt out and panicked and angry, exhausted, fatigued. You just feel overloaded and overwhelmed, and it's hard to get things done. So when there's a lot of many different stressors happening, it's easier to fall into the orange red zone, or when you have a few stressors that are very intense, it's also easy to kind of slip into that zone. So some signs and symptoms that you may be stressed: um, tired and unmotivated, overwhelmed, burnt out, changes in behavior, social withdrawal, irritation, anger, denial, uncertainty, nervousness, anxiety, sad or depressed, difficulty sleeping, trouble concentrating, physical aches and pains are all signs that perhaps you might be falling more into that like yellow to orange to red in terms of your stress and what it's doing to you. Um, there's a lot of effects of stress. So there's symptoms of stress, and then there's the effects that those might have longer term or more intensely. Um, there can be a lot of fear during this time, particularly during COVID-19, of health and the health of others and finances, loss of services, loss of community, changes in sleep or eating. Maybe not sleeping well for one night might not be a big deal, but not sleeping well for multiple nights, or changes in eating patterns, not eating enough, eating too much, not eating the best or healthiest foods for you, difficulty sleeping, difficulty concentrating, and worsening of health problems, both mental and medical, can be some of the effects of stress during COVID-19. Increased use of tobacco, alcohol, or other substance can also be an unhelpful effect of stress during this time. So I want to talk a little bit different about how stress is different during COVID-19. So again, we all experience stress during different times, but this again can feel qualitatively and quantitatively different than the stress folks have experienced in the past. And some reasons for this are there can feel like there's a lack of choice and control. So there is so much that's out of our control right now that we don't know. And that's really can exacerbate stress. Another way that it's different is that oftentimes people who are experiencing stress, they plan something to look forward to, whether that's just like a movie night with some friends or going out to dinner, or, making plans to visit family or visit friends, or even, a yoga class that you're excited for, or a trip or a vacation, something that's fun or enjoyable. And a lot of times right now, we can't actually plan those fun or enjoyable activities because we don't know when it might be safe or we might be able to do some of those things. And so that can be really challenging for folks to not have some of those designated, pinpointed outlets that they're hoping for fun or relaxation. Like I mentioned before, using the coping skills that you may have used to use may be limited during this time. You might not be able to do them or do them in the ways that you want to do. And we're also adjusting to a lot of different things at once, right? Remote learning, new rules, new regulations, things that come up. Adjusting to one new thing can be stressful, but we're adjusting to a lot and a lot of different things in a lot of different environments all at the same time. And that's really challenging. We're also holding a lot right now. This presentation and workshop is mostly focused on self-care as it relates to COVID-19. And I also think it's important to acknowledge that COVID-19 is also happening in the context and backdrop of a lot of other things that are often quite stressful for individuals. The socio-political climate, what's happening in our country and in the world, can add to a lot of stress for folks. So I just want to make sure I acknowledge that, although this is related to COVID-19, it's not just COVID-19 that's affecting individuals during this time. So we talked about what stress is, how it impacts you, the negative effects of it. So I want to spend the rest of this time talking about ways in which we can cope with stress and uncertainty and anxiety, right? So the important thing is to recognize when you're feeling stressed and to take care of yourself, right? Ideally, we're taking care of ourselves all the time, and that's something that I want to highlight as we continue with this workshop. Is it's important to take care of yourself when you're stressed, and it's just as important to take care of yourself when you're not, right? So different ways to cope with stress, figuring out ways to balance your roles and responsibilities, seeking support from those in your world that you trust, relaxation, meditation exercises, reframing your thoughts and feelings, reaching out to social supports, seeking professional support, practicing self-care, which is what we're going to focus on. And all of those that I just listed above can all fit into a self-care practice as well. So self-care can be broken down into different areas. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the goal is living a balanced life. And so in doing that, what we want to focus on is making sure that we're taking care of ourselves in all of the domains in our world that are important to us, right? And so this is just a list of different breakdown of areas of focus of self-care. So sensory, being present, feeling grounded, taking a break from your thinking, enjoyment, doing something that's pleasurable, mental and mastery, challenging yourself, learning new things, engaging your brain. Spiritual, whether that's a formal religious or spiritual practice, or it's more just about where you find meaning in your world, and a combination of both if that's what fits for you. Um, Emotional and psychological is allowing space for your emotional processing and thinking through and working through some of these difficult things. Like I mentioned a few times, there's a lot of difficult emotions that come up related to how folks are doing right now with the current situation. And being able to allow space for that is an important part of self-care. Physical, so engaging your body can be a great way to help with stress and improve your self-care. Social, of course, connecting with others, developing and maintaining relationships, finding your community, and continuing to be a part of those communities that matter to you. And there's also professional, right? So focusing on growth, development, learning in your academics and or your work life. And this here is a self-care wheel. It's a common handout that I use with my students when I'm working with them. And it's just another way to break down sort of this pie of self-care, right? And something I like to highlight is that this is divided up into 6 different domains, as you can see on the screen. And it's not that everyone has to have all 6 domains equal in their world, right? Because for some folks, right, physical self-care may outweigh professional self-care, or vice versa, right? So it's really about finding what your pie looks like when you're engaging ideally in the most effective self-care for you in creating that balance, right? So your scales don't all have to be in equal percentage, but they need to be the right percentage for you, right? And this, again, is going to be on our website, so it will allow an opportunity if you want to go back to this. This is a really great little wheel that gives a lot of different concrete things you can do to help improve your self-care within each of these different domains. So another thing that I think can be important and really helpful sort of goes along the lines of reframing your thoughts, is being able to step back and pause and reflect during this time before moving forward with maybe a concrete self-care plan. We can get really stuck and we want to fix it. We want to do things immediately. And really, I think it's important that we slow down and reflect and figure out what it is that we want and we need during this time. So some questions to maybe ask yourself are, if you were to look back at this time in 5, 10 years, what would you want it to say about you, right? What would it mean to you? What would you be doing, right? That's the same. Is there anything that you would be doing differently? How can you maybe use this time as an opportunity? For a lot of folks, we have a lot more unstructured time. And for a lot of folks, that can feel uncomfortable because we want to be moving or doing something or engaged in some way. And if we take just maybe 5, 10, 20 minutes of that unstructured time, that maybe we're watching a rerun of our Netflix show that we always watch or playing on our phone, we can stop and pause and try and figure out how we can use this as an opportunity, right? To slow down, to reflect, and to really get in tune and get in touch with what matters to you in your life, right? And that goes along with considering what you value in this world, right? What matters to you? Where do you find meaning? Where do you find purpose? And how do you act in line with these values? Right. I do want to offer a warning as I talk about these reflections, because I do think it is incredibly important to note that we will all not be using all of our time super effectively and efficiently and optimally during this time, partially because we're stressed, right? And I just want to make a warning to be aware of some of the social media trends out there. I've seen a lot of information of like, this time needs to be the time that you can learn a new language and you can develop a new skill. I mean, you can do all these things that you weren't able to do before. And the reality is that yes, part of that might be true. The second part of that reality is that it takes time to process some of the grief and the loss and to focus on yourself. And it's okay if you're not going to be a CrossFit champ during quarantine. It's okay if your self-care looks different. Um, it's okay if you're struggling. So just a note to be aware of that. It seems to have slowed down since the start of quarantining, but I know that it's still there, and there can sometimes feel like a lot of that social pressure and media pressure and news pressure to do all of the things all of the time. And we don't have to do that. We just have to do what works for us. And that leads to the question of like, what do you need? The biggest question. And it's something that we're going to focus on in our next meeting next week on the 20th will be the 21st will be our next self-care workshop, which is going to focus on figuring out what you need. Seems like a simple question, seems like something that we should just be able to quote unquote do. And it's often a challenging question for folks because we are not used to most of the time focusing, slowing down, and noticing what we need. Um, and without that, it can be really hard to move forward. So that's just something that I think it can take time and it can take practice to figure out what it is that you need. But really, that's the first step in engaging in a self-care practice is figuring that out. And honestly, it sometimes just takes some trial and error. So once we've reflected, we've slowed down, we've tuned into ourselves, we tried to figure out what we need. The next step is the action part, right? So going back to self-care defined, self-care is any activity that you're doing that is going to help to take care of your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. So some suggestions for self-care, some of these are more specific, some of them are more broad, some of them are more intensive, some less. And again, everyone's self-care practice is going to look different. So the idea is not that you take all of these suggestions and try to do all of them right now. It's maybe making note of a few ones that you think, wow, like that's something I think I need, or that's something that I think is missing in my life that would be helpful. And start with a few of those, the ones that really maybe you find inspired, or maybe it's just a couple that you feel like this could be a good start, you know, some more simpler things that maybe I could do. Right? For example, just getting out of your pajamas, right? I know it's easy that most of us are at home working and we can stay in our sweatpants or our pajamas. We can do our Zoom calls from the couch if we want to do, or a dorm room, in bed. You can go to class in bed. It can sometimes sound appealing, right? To kind of just stay in your pajamas, stay comfortable, right? But there's research that says that if we can get out of our pajamas and change, that even if we're in the same environment, that can be a different motivator. Um, so I'm not necessarily saying you need to put on your tux or your ball gown to get your work done, but maybe throw on a pair of jeans or even change into a different t-shirt. Get moving. So physical activity can be and is often a very important piece of self-care. So get moving. Again, it doesn't mean that you have to be going to the gym for 4 hours a day. It can simply be doing a 5-minute stretching routine in between your classes, or simply standing up, raising your arms over your head, shaking yourself out, jumping around a little bit, taking a walk around the block. Um, Anything to help get yourself moving. There's so many great resources on YouTube of different like stretching or yoga practices, and everything from super simple 5-minute beginner to more intensive practices. Again, figuring out what works for you, and try it out, test it out. Get outside. Nature is a fabulous way to help engage in self-care. And we're in a wonderful place where there's a lot of opportunity to get outside and get in nature. And it's not always feasible, right? We don't all have access to transportation to get out and go on a hike. The weather's not always super great. Um, so even if you can't go on these big outings, right? Again, it's how do you make self-care work for you in a COVID world, right? So maybe it's just opening a window, or if you have a balcony or a back deck, just getting out on your deck and taking a few deep breaths in, right? Looking at the trees, it's beautiful out right now. Um, so starting there, making meaningful connections with family, peers, friends, really trying to find a sense of community. And I know it's a lot more difficult now that so many things are remote and virtual. But I'd really encourage you all to take a risk and get involved virtually in some UO spaces, whether that's a club or a different workshop. Activities, different things on campus that you could do. There's a lot of different events happening. I know there's a lot of Zoom fatigue. It can be tough to do everything virtually, but taking that risk when you feel like you could do it, even if it might be a little bit challenging, to really help build a community. Um, and staying in touch with those that you already are connected with, family, friends, peers, people in your world. Um, Again, there can be a lot of Zoom fatigue, so it can be tough to, after you're on Zoom classes all day, to then engage in more technology connection. So finding the space and the right way to do that can be helpful. And we're going to have a workshop in the future on how to build and maintain connections during COVID. So stay tuned for that one. Another thing that I think is important is limiting news and social media. Like we mentioned before, um, there can be a lot of stress with what's going on in the world, right? And news outlets and social media tend to be big platforms that stuff all gets disseminated. And it can be stressful when you feel bombarded by it. So I'm not saying don't go on social media, don't watch the news, but really be intentional about it, and find that line that works for you to help you feel informed without being overwhelmed. And that's going to be different for everyone where that line is. Utilize trusted sources that you trust when getting your information. Um, and another helpful way to limit it is just turn off your notifications on your phone, right? It can be so stressful when you're having a relaxing moment and all of a sudden you get a ping on your phone and you're bombarded with something that's stressful that's happened that you've seen on social media or on the news. Um, it can also be helpful to kind of hide your news sources or social media on your phone, right? So maybe make a separate folder that those different apps go in, so that you need to be more intentional about going into it and actually wanting to and choosing to get on your social media versus that habit that we can often fall into where we unlock our phone and the first button we push is a social media app, and then we kind of get sucked in and we don't really feel like we have as much control over that. A few more self-care suggestions. Work to find and keep a routine and a schedule that works for you. Again, that can look different for everyone depending on what their schedules are and what their daily tasks are. For some people, it might be having a routine on Monday and a routine on Tuesday and Wednesday, etc., that all look a little bit different just because of your schedule. Or it might be having a weekday and a weekend routine in schedule. But really trying to find a way. I think one of the most helpful things is to at least have a morning routine and have an evening routine where you can kind of prepare yourself for the day and then wind down at the end of the night. It's really easy to kind of lose track of time, and all of a sudden you're sleeping in later and you're staying up later. And we really want to keep as much of a routine as possible with flexibility, because of course things change and that's important. Um, Take regular breaks, right? Whether that's regular breaks in between classes, regular breaks when you're studying, regular breaks from your computer, right? So take a few deep breaths, stretch, go on some socially distant walks. Um, Mindfulness, yoga, meditation exercises can be really great in reducing our stress level because it really changes our body's response to stress and helps us move into that rest and relax and restore place versus that fight or flight place that stress can often bring us. Starting a gratitude or positivity journal can be a really helpful way to widen the lens a little bit, right? That it can often feel, and I've heard from a lot of folks, that it feels like there's so much negativity happening right now, right? And our brain is sort of wired to focus on that negativity as a way to protect ourselves and to stay safe, right? So an example, from back in the day is right? We're wired to see that negativity, that fear, that anxiety of that tiger that could be coming to eat us, right? How that shifted over time is that fear, that worry, that anxiety is now stuff that is you're seeing on the news, or maybe it's COVID related things, or maybe it's just emotions, right, that are happening. But we're wired to focus on the negative. And so really by starting a gratitude and positivity journal, it can really help again widen the lens and reframe so that we're able to see both the positive and the things we're grateful for and the things that we're stressed about or that are making us sad or that are causing anxiety or making us feel um, upset, right? And the idea behind this is not that you should only focus on the positive and don't worry, be happy mentality, because that's also not helpful. It's really about being realistic and being real with yourself and being able to see all perspectives of things that are happening. Eating well, of course, it's a very common one. It's a very seemingly simple one. And some folks eat to cope. So maybe notice when you're eating just because you're bored, or notice when you're not eating because you're not on a schedule, right? Again, that can be a challenging thing when everything is happening in the same environment, right? When from when you wake up to when you go to bed, you're in the same room. It can be easy to forget to maybe eat breakfast or eat lunch when you usually do those things, right? You usually stop and grab a bagel on your way to your first class in the morning, and you don't have that opportunity now. So it means being more intentional about your eating. Um, some last and final self-care suggestions: limit your substance use and check in with yourself about your substance use. Um, Again, it's something that it's unique to everyone. But like I mentioned earlier, that there, with stress and with COVID related stress, there can be an increase in substance use. And we really want to check in and make sure and understand why that substance use is happening, right? So before you engage in substance use, if that's what you're choosing to do, know, is this out of boredom? Am I relaxing? Am I having fun? Am I coping? Am I avoiding something that I don't want to be experiencing? Right. And by asking yourself that question, you might better be able to understand um, where that's coming from and whether that's actually something that's serving you and helpful to your self care or whether that's not. Um, Setting boundaries with friends and family, whether those are physical boundaries, putting up a sheet in your room if you need to kind of create your own space, or whether that's mental and emotional boundaries. For example, if you have a family member that every time you talk to them, they just want to talk about COVID, it's okay to express that you don't have the capacity to handle those or manage those conversations right now and you prefer not to talk about that topic. Those are totally fine boundaries to be setting. Um, Keeping your space nice, again, in the boundaries realm, right? Maybe try to create a space that's your school space and your home space in that one environment that you're in, right? So maybe that's doing your homework and your schoolwork at your desk and sitting in a different chair while you're watching your Netflix, right? And then a different space when you're trying to go to sleep at night. Engage your brain with something that's not on a screen, right? Many of us are on our computers, our laptops, our phones most of the time now. Whereas many folks, maybe they were only on their computer for work 3 or 4 hours a day, and now it's 8 or 9 hours a day. And then you go home and you're doing your homework, and then that's on the computer too, right? That's a lot of screen time. So trying something that you can get away from the screen, right? Coloring, knitting, crafting, painting, trying an instrument, gardening, reading, something that you can do to disengage from the technology and the screen time can be really helpful for self-care. So those are just a few of the suggestions. Again, you can always go back and rewatch this workshop if you want to go back and check in on some of those different suggestions. And I also want to let folks know that we, again, will be doing this will be a weekly workshop series. This was more of an introduction to self-care, and future workshops will be focused on developing specific self-care skills. So it will really be introducing a specific skill and then learning strategies to help make that happen in your world. So these are the list of topics. Again, you can check out our website, the Counseling Center, the wellness workshops, and there will be a Zoom link there. The workshop meetings are drop-in, quote unquote, which means that you don't have to sign up. There's no commitment to doing every single workshop. It's picking the ones that you feel like, oh, that might be something that could be helpful for me, and checking it out. You're welcome to attend all of them, and know that you don't have to if there's certain ones that you feel like might not be a good fit, or maybe you feel like you've already got a good handle on that one. Um, and even if those things are true, you're of course welcome to pop in and get a refresher on it. Most of these follow-up workshops will be roughly around the 30-minute mark or so. Some might be slightly less, some might be slightly more, but you can expect about 30 minutes for these follow-up workshops. And I did, of course, want to mention some additional resources. So self-care is for yourself, but it doesn't mean that you need to do it by yourself. We have a wonderful community at U of O, and a lot of different services available to help students. So check out the Duck Nest, has great wellness workshops that they're offering to students. Check out the Division of Student Life. They're a great resource and a great website to figure out how you can get connected, to figure out what organizations or clubs that there are on campus, and to see what events are happening on campus that you could participate in, and again, work on building that sense of community and doing stuff that matters to you and fits for you. And of course, we have university counseling services. So we are offering, most of our work is happening remotely at this time. So we're seeing students for telehealth services. If you're interested or think it would be helpful to connect with a counselor, you can call the Counseling Center, or excuse me, Counseling Services Office. And they can help connect you for a same-day consultation if that's something you're interested in. And you can meet with a counselor to talk about options and figure out resources of what might make most sense for you. We have some really awesome workshops and groups, different outreaches, and short-term individual counseling if that's a good fit. And we can also help you to connect you to other resources within and outside UO if that's something that would be helpful. So I just want to offer a quick thanks to these folks, some other folks who have been doing some self-care during COVID, presentations and practices. And my takeaway, my hope that you will take away from this workshop today is to, one, be well, and two, of course, to take care of yourself. So I want to thank everyone who tuned in, whether live or not live, and are watching this at a later time, for this first installment of our Self-Care During COVID workshop series. So again, be well and take care of yourself.